He always asked me to wear headphones when I worked. Said background noise pulled him out of focus more than light ever could, especially during editing. And over time, I stopped questioning that rule. Stopped noticing how much space we gave each other under the same roof. So when he left early that morning and forgot to close his laptop, I didn't think twice about using it for a quick transfer, just to speed things up for my own deadline. The folder was fuller than I expected. Dozens of raw audio files without labels, some as short as 30 seconds, others stretching out in silence for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Just the distant buzz of ambient noise, the shuffle of footsteps on gravel, the occasional gust of wind against the mic screen, and I clicked on one that seemed incomplete, maybe broken, just to clear it out of the queue before starting my actual session. It opened with nothing. Just the slow hum of a room not quite empty, not quite occupied, then a scrape, maybe a chair leg, followed by a breath I didn't recognize until I heard my own name, spoken softly but without hesitation, like a thread dropped into water. And I stopped everything, froze in my seat as the second voice came through. Lower, slower, achingly familiar. And suddenly I knew. It was me. It was him. I hadn't remembered being recorded, hadn't seen a camera, hadn't noticed a mic. But the sound was clean, too clean, and I heard my own laugh, the kind I always tried to control around him but never could. And when he said something about how nothing really changes between some people, my voice responded too fast, too easily, too warm, and then silence. Not blank silence. Silence filled with proximity, the kind of quiet that has weight. I could hear fabric shift, the slightest hitch in breath. His, not mine. Then mine, caught slightly in my throat. Then a sound so subtle I almost doubted it. The press of a mouth against skin, light, questioning, followed by one exhale. Mine again. I didn't pull away. That's what hit hardest. The recording kept going, but I didn't. I sat there, heart hammering beneath my ribs, listening to my own betrayal looped into the project my husband had trusted me to touch. I didn't know whether he had heard it. I didn't know if he'd left it there by accident or intention, if I was supposed to find it, or if this was a thread that unraveled the whole thing. I yanked the headphones off, not because I was done listening, but because I couldn't take the sound of my own breath anymore. The way it betrayed me before words ever had the chance. I stood up too fast. The chair scraped against the floor, and I didn't know where to go. Didn't know what room in this house still belonged to me, because somehow even the silence felt recorded. When the front door opened, I was still standing there, laptop half closed, screen dimmed but not asleep, hands trembling just enough to make me feel disconnected from my body. He walked in like nothing was out of place, set down his bag and smiled. Not forced, not suspicious, just the soft, habitual smile I'd learned to decode over the years. "You started early today," he said. I nodded, my lips barely moving. I wanted to look him in the eyes and ask everything at once. How long he'd known, whether he hated me, whether this whole marriage was just a set piece now. But the question stuck in my throat. He stepped close, leaned down, kissed the side of my head gently, and walked past me into the kitchen, humming under his breath. It was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. I stood frozen, stunned by the absence of confrontation, by the absence of anything. I copied my own project back to my flash drive, closed every file, but that one stayed burned into my memory. More than memory. It was proof. It was still there. And if he had heard it, if he had left it in on purpose, then this wasn't just a slip. It was a message. He called out a few minutes later, something about needing a different adapter for the camera rig, his tone perfectly casual, and I walked into the other room with legs I could barely control, handed him the cord without meeting his eyes, felt his fingers brush mine, and tried not to flinch. He said, "Thank you." Nothing more. I walked onto the balcony, closed the glass door behind me, and let the quiet settle into my spine. The sun hadn't fully set, but the light was low, stretching shadows across the grass below, and I found myself staring at strangers walking their dogs, sipping coffee, moving through lives unbroken by secrets, lives not waiting for the sound of silence to explode into confession. I sat down and thought about that day, the day of the kiss, and realized something had already been breaking before it ever happened. Maybe I didn't want it to be real. Maybe I didn't want to admit that I'd let something inside me reach for warmth without asking permission from my own conscience. I pressed my palms against my knees, breathing as slowly as I could, and wondered if he would say something later that night, if we'd sit in bed beside each other, breathing in rhythm but living out of sync, and if I'd have the courage to say the words myself. But nothing about this felt courageous. It felt inevitable. When I came back inside, he didn't ask where I'd gone. He was pouring tea, humming again, and I stood there watching him for 1 second too long. He looked up. Want a cup? I said yes, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. The mug was warm in my hands, and the silence was warm too. Not forgiving, not angry, just waiting. And in that waiting, I knew something was already shifting, even if no one ever said a word. I didn't ask whether he had listened to the file, not even when he handed me the finished scene a day later and asked me to clean the sound, to tighten the rhythm a bit, as he liked to say when something felt too real for the script. I took the hard drive without looking up, trying to keep my hand from shaking, trying to stay composed, though I wasn't even sure what I was pretending to be composed about anymore. The new scene was labeled simply Interview 3 Final.wav. I opened it expecting another standard testimonial. Some minor character reciting details from a past betrayal. The kind of monologue that fills the middle of a documentary with heavy pauses and soft ambient piano. But the voice was sharper, clearer, more deliberate. A woman speaking, slow and vulnerable, talking about the way you can live with someone and still feel like a stranger in your own kitchen. About noticing small things that don't belong. A smell, a pause, a flicker in someone's eyes that wasn't there the day before. The words didn't belong to me, but the tone did, the pacing, the rhythm. I listened again. Then again. It wasn't my voice, not exactly, but the lines felt lifted from something I had once written in a forgotten notebook. Something he must have read, or heard, or absorbed in some quiet corner of our shared life. And I felt my stomach pull tight at the realization that he was directing more than just footage. He was directing me. I took a deep breath and played it one last time, listening for any hint that I was wrong, for any evidence that this was just a coincidence. There was none. The scene was fiction, but I was in it. Every sentence was something I had once said or meant or almost said but never dared. And now it lived on screen, with another face, another voice, another actress claiming my pain like it had never been mine to begin with. That night, he sat across from me at the table, eating slowly, chewing in rhythm with the ticking clock on the wall, and asked if the sound on scene 12 worked for me. I said yes. My voice didn't crack. He smiled slightly, said he liked the intimacy of it, the way it felt like someone trying to say something without saying it directly. Then he added, that hesitation, it makes it human. I nodded, though I wasn't sure which hesitation he meant. Later, while he slept, I sat alone in the edit room scrolling through older folders, wondering how far back this had gone, how many moments he had captured without telling me, how many times I had mistaken silence for absence when maybe it was just quiet observation. There were hours of material I hadn't seen, files I didn't recognize. I opened one and let it play. It was a shot from a side project I'd barely remembered. B-roll from the kitchen, sunlight coming through the windows, dishes stacked neatly in the sink. There was no dialogue, just the soft scrape of ceramic, a cabinet closing, my voice humming low and out of tune. I felt dizzy watching it. He had filmed me without telling me. Or maybe he had told me, and I hadn't listened. And then, a moment that shouldn't have existed. Another man's voice, from the doorway. His, the one I had kissed. He said something too quietly to catch. My voice answered. I laughed. That same laugh, the one I thought I had contained. The screen went black before anything else. The clip was under 15 seconds. It was saved in a folder marked Temp Scratch Unused. I couldn't tell if that was meant to protect me or to hide the evidence in plain sight. I closed the file and stepped away from the desk. The walls of the room felt smaller than they had before. The soft blinking of the equipment lights seemed suddenly brighter, more deliberate, like they were watching me too. The next day, he asked if I could join him for a location shoot. "Nothing big," he said. "Just some exterior shots near the gallery space." I nodded again. I was nodding too much. We spent 2 hours walking between facades, alleys, quiet courtyards with fading graffiti and cracked stone, while he filmed silently, occasionally gesturing for me to hold a reflector or adjust a stand. He barely spoke. He didn't have to. The silences between us had changed their shape. At one point, while he adjusted focus, I turned and found the other man. The one from the cafe, the one from the file, walking toward us from the opposite side of the square. He wasn't part of the shoot. He wasn't holding anything, but he looked straight at me, then at my husband, and then back again. I didn't move. He slowed his step and gave me a look I couldn't name. Not guilt, not fear, not even regret. It was something closer to recognition. I felt my pulse quicken. My husband didn't look up. "Need help with this one?" the man asked, gesturing at the tripod. My husband still didn't turn. "We're good," he said, calm as ever. The other man waited a beat longer, then nodded once and walked away. We didn't speak of it. Not then. Not in the car on the way home. Not over dinner. He kissed me goodnight. Soft, quiet, like a habit. Like a symbol. And I kissed him back. It was the first time in weeks I had felt the weight of his lips and not known what they meant. After he turned off the light, I lay beside him in the dark, eyes open, and wondered if this was his way of forgiving me. Or if it was the calm before something else entirely. Was he going to confront me? Was he crafting something larger than words? Something he'd unveil only when I least expected it? Or was this it? Was I already inside the film? I wasn't looking for anything. Not that morning. Not consciously. I opened the project to finish a noise pass on one of the background interviews. Something technical, something easy. A few clipped frequencies, a mic rub during a jacket movement. Nothing important. It was routine, quiet work, the kind of task I used to enjoy before everything changed texture. The folder I opened wasn't new. It had been there for weeks, buried under piles of temp exports and reference clips. But something caught my eye this time. A file name that shouldn't have existed. It was too specific, too deliberate. It was my name. Just that. No underscore, no date stamp, no version number. Just my name. It was the only file on the drive that wasn't labeled according to project convention. No tag, no metadata. Just the name I'd heard him say 1,000 times before. But never like this. I stared at it longer than I should have. One hand still on the trackpad, the other hovering uselessly over my cup, no longer interested in warmth or caffeine. I hesitated before opening it. Maybe I already knew. Maybe that moment of pause was my last chance to pretend. But curiosity doesn't ask for permission. The screen went dark for a second as the clip loaded. Then a slow fade in. The living room. Our living room. The same worn rug, the same books on the shelf, the same hanging light that buzzed when dimmed too low. The angle was new. Lower than usual. Unstaged. There was no crew. No actors. Only me. I was seated on the edge of the couch, reading something I couldn't see. My movements were natural, unguarded, the way you move when you think you're alone. I heard myself humming faintly. A tune I didn't recognize. Something from somewhere I couldn't place. Then, off-screen, came a voice. His voice. He asked me a question, quietly, almost absent-mindedly. I responded with something vague, casual, nothing important. But the exchange lingered, like the air in the room had thickened slightly. And I knew, watching it, that this moment had meant more to him than it ever had to me. Because he had kept it. Because he had named it. The clip ended abruptly. No transition. No fade out. Just black. I closed the window, but the name remained, blinking softly in the corner of the desktop. I sat there and tried to tell myself it wasn't what I thought it was. That maybe it was just reference or a lighting test or something that didn't mean anything. But it did mean something. It meant he had started editing me into the film long before I realized I was a character. The next morning, he brought me coffee. Black. No sugar, no milk. Exactly the way I drank it on difficult days. He placed it gently beside me without saying anything, just a nod and that familiar, unreadable half-smile. I thanked him, and he walked out of the room. I didn't hear his footsteps after that. Later, when I passed by the editing suite, the door was slightly open. His laptop was on. A paused frame sat frozen on the screen. An alleyway at dusk, dim blue light casting long shadows along the brick wall. A woman stood at the far end, back to the camera, still and silent. It wasn't me, but it looked like me. The jacket was mine. The posture. Even the way the hair curled slightly near the collar. It wasn't performance. It was replication. He must have sensed me. He looked up and saw me standing there, but instead of closing the screen, he pressed play. The figure on the screen turned slowly. The face remained blurred. Intentional, precise. But the body language was unmistakable. The woman walked forward, then stopped. A man entered frame beside her. He leaned close. She didn't move. There was no kiss, no confession, no clear proof. But somehow that made it worse. He hit pause again, looked at me, then said calmly, "Do you think she wanted him to kiss her?" I stared at the screen. My voice didn't work. He waited, then nodded once like my silence was an answer. "That's what I thought," he added. He turned back to the screen. I stepped away. I didn't know where to go because there was no part of the house that felt like mine anymore. Every wall might be holding a lens. Every corner might be watching. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia only matters when you're wrong. That evening, I opened my email to send a routine mix to a collaborator. A draft was already sitting in the outbox. Unsent. Open. The subject line said, "New clip, urgent review." The link inside was a private video file. I clicked. It was the cafe. The original footage. The angle wasn't from a phone. It wasn't from a mic left behind. It was from across the street. From someone who had waited for it. Someone who knew what might happen. Someone who had planned ahead. I slammed the laptop shut so fast it nearly toppled off the desk. My breath was gone. The walls felt too bright again. My skin too visible. He had filmed it. Not recorded it by accident. Not overheard. He had filmed the moment. The moment I told myself was spontaneous. The moment I told myself wasn't anything. And he had kept it. I sat down on the floor because I didn't trust my legs anymore. My throat burned and my mouth was dry. I wanted to scream, but there was nothing I could scream that he didn't already know. And suddenly I felt it. Not fear. Not shame. A strange, bitter grief. Because he didn't confront me. He didn't ask. He wrote a scene. He called again. I hadn't saved his number, but I recognized the way he breathed before speaking. Slow, careful, like someone measuring silence before words. I didn't say hello. I just let the pause stretch until he finally asked if we could meet. Not to fix anything, not to explain, just to talk. I told him I didn't know, but my answer came too slowly. He heard it in the delay. I walked there on foot, past the cafe where it happened, past the bookstore we once spent an afternoon in without touching, past all the quiet markers of something I had refused to name until it had already begun. He was waiting where he said he'd be, the bench by the park gate, where the trees curved just enough to break the view from the street. He didn't stand when I approached, just shifted to make space. We sat without speaking for a while. The air between us wasn't heavy, just unfinished. He looked thinner than I remembered. Maybe it was the light, or guilt, or just me seeing more than I used to. When he finally spoke, he didn't ask if I was okay. He said he thought I might have called back sooner. I didn't answer. "I'm not trying to make it worse," he said. "I just wanted to say it mattered." I turned toward him. "What did?" He looked down. That it wasn't nothing. I wanted to tell him that nothing is exactly what I needed it to be right now. That if I let it become more, even for a second, the whole shape of my life would change. But the words didn't form. He said he understood, said he wouldn't ask again. But there was something in the way he looked at me. Something that still wanted more than just silence. I stood up first. He stayed seated. I left without looking back. When I got home, the lights were already dimmed, the table was set, and there was music playing quietly from the speakers in the corner. Not jazz, not piano, just soft guitar, instrumental, atmospheric. The kind of music you barely notice until you realize it's been shaping the whole evening. He was in the kitchen, hands wet, sleeves rolled. He didn't look surprised to see me, didn't ask where I'd been. Just smiled and said, "Perfect timing," and turned back to rinse the knife. I helped without being asked. Poured the wine, lit the candle, folded the napkins into neat shapes. We moved around each other easily, almost gently, like we were rehearsing a version of ourselves we hadn't played in years. At one point, he reached over to take a bowl from my hands, and his fingers brushed mine. I didn't pull away. During dinner, he asked me how the edit was going, if the levels on the newer interview were too hot. I said they were fine. He nodded and kept eating. His rhythm didn't change, but mine did. After we finished, I stayed behind to clear the plates. When I turned to bring them to the sink, he was already there, blocking the counter, watching me, not smiling anymore, but not angry either, just still. Then he stepped closer, just once. No build-up, no warning. He leaned in and kissed me. Not a quick kiss, not polite. A kiss like he remembered me differently than I remembered myself. A kiss I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. A kiss I wanted to resist but didn't. A kiss that made me question everything I thought I knew about distance. When it ended, he rested his forehead against mine, said nothing, then turned and walked out of the kitchen. I stood there, heart pounding, lips still warm, unsure what he meant. What it meant. Whether it was forgiveness or performance or something in between. Later that night, when I entered the workroom to gather my hard drive, I found a page on the desk. A single sheet, folded once. Nothing handwritten. Just printed text. Scene breakdown. Title, Interior Kitchen. Evening. The description was short, 3 lines. She turns toward him. He kisses her like he did before it ended. She responds, "One last time." I stood motionless, the paper trembling slightly in my fingers, though I wasn't cold. Was that tonight? Was that memory or plan? Was I living inside a script I didn't write? I dropped the page back where it was and left the room without touching anything else. In bed, I lay still while he slept beside me. His breathing was steady, unchanged, as if nothing had happened, as if the kiss was just another line in a long sequence of scenes we kept replaying with different lighting, different subtext. I stared at the ceiling and wondered what would happen if I asked him directly, about the cafe footage, about the edit labeled with my name, about the woman in the alley who moved like me. But I already knew what he would do. He would say something vague and layered, something careful, something that could mean everything or nothing. He had become too skilled at working without a script. And maybe I had become too afraid to leave the frame. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Only stillness. Only that same guitar track, still playing somewhere faint in the background. He had kissed me, and I had kissed him back. And he had already written how it would end. The next morning, the house was colder than usual, though the windows were shut and the radiators clicked on like always. And I knew it wasn't the air that had changed. It was the space itself. Thinner somehow. Like something had been extracted overnight and the walls hadn't yet adjusted to its absence. He was already awake when I came into the kitchen, standing by the counter with a full mug in one hand and the newspaper in the other, turning the page without looking at me, as if nothing in the last 24 hours had altered the shape of what we were or how we moved around each other in these silent rooms. I didn't speak. He didn't either. There was no mention of the screening, no comment about the audience, no question about how I felt or what I thought or whether I'd recognized what he had done. But of course he knew I had. That was the whole point. There was nothing left to say. He had shown it all, carefully, deliberately, without raising his voice or asking forgiveness or naming the betrayal aloud. I made tea with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He glanced over once, only briefly, then looked back at the same article as if he were still reading it. I brought the mug to the table, sat down across from him, and stared at the condensation forming near the rim. It reminded me of sound checks, of breath on microphones, of how silence never meant stillness. Just waiting. Eventually, he said, "I'll be out most of the afternoon." No explanation, no details, just a schedule. I nodded. That was all I could do. When he left, the quiet that settled in the house wasn't peaceful. It was something else. Not tension exactly, but the memory of tension, like a muscle that's been clenched too long and doesn't know how to soften. I walked slowly through each room, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of shelves, the places where we'd once laughed and argued and lived without measuring every step. There was a notepad on the desk in the study, blank except for a list written near the top. Call distributor, update bio, confirm panel. His handwriting was exact, like always. Clean lines and even spacing. Nothing impulsive, nothing personal, just work. But I noticed what was missing. My name. Anywhere. Even in shorthand. Even as a note to remind him of something I had helped build. I sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the door across the room. The one he had used for filming. The one that led nowhere in particular but had become a symbol of retreat, and I wondered if I should pack a bag. Not because I had decided to leave, but because I couldn't imagine staying when staying meant living in a house where I had become source material. Was that why he never asked? Because he didn't need to hear it from me when he could just play it back? By early evening, I still hadn't moved. The day had passed in fragments, in soundless loops, each one circling the same realization. We had reached the end not with a fight, not with slammed doors or broken promises, but with edits, with cuts, with scenes built from truth and curated for maximum restraint. He came home just after 7. I heard the door but didn't turn. He walked past the room without stopping, then doubled back a moment later, standing in the doorway long enough for me to feel him watching. I didn't speak. I waited. He cleared his throat once. "There's dinner if you're hungry." I turned then. He didn't look angry, just tired. I asked, "Did you think it would make me understand something?" His eyes flickered, then steadied. "Number, I thought it would make me feel something." I nodded slowly. "And did it?" He didn't answer. That night, we didn't sleep in the same bed. Not by declaration, not by conflict, just by absence. He stayed in the spare room, and I stayed where I'd always slept, though the sheets felt unfamiliar, the mattress too level, the silence too loud. In the morning, he left without saying goodbye. I watched from the window as he crossed the street, shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets. He didn't look back. I went into the workroom and opened the folder marked Final. It held the last version of the film. A clean export. Dated. Archived. Finished. There were other folders, too. Unused takes, discarded narration, alternate endings. I opened one by mistake and saw a different closing shot. The woman walking, but this time she turned around. This time she knocked. This version had been deleted. The file name was grayed out, but not gone. He had made the choice. He had chosen not to imagine a version where I came back. I shut the laptop slowly and sat in the silence that followed. It was different now. Less about what hadn't been said, and more about what had. Not through dialogue, not through confrontation. Through every angle, every cut, every shadow that mimicked my shape until even I couldn't tell where performance ended. I hadn't seen the other man again. He hadn't called. I hadn't written. Whatever we were had dissolved quietly, respectfully, the way people vanish from each other's lives when they know no return would restore what had been lost. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about understanding. Or maybe it was about consequences. Not loud, not cinematic, just persistent. I started taking long walks in the late afternoon, tracing new streets, unfamiliar blocks, places with no memory etched into the sidewalks. It didn't help. Not yet. But it gave me movement. And movement was better than stillness. One evening, I passed a poster for the film. Just the title. No faces. No quote. Just a doorway in black and white, half open, empty inside. I stood there a long time. Then I kept walking. And I didn't look back.